What is author marketing mastery through optimization, you ask? I'm going to tell you. It's the best way for us authors to make a living selling our books. Are you tired of hearing gurus tell you your book is only good enough to be a lead magnet for services? Are you tired of feeling like you have to be a slave to social media and then frustrated when that time doesn't actually help you sell books? I was too, until I found Ammo. Ammo is the only program that reliably produces results, and it works for anyone. Is it hard work? You bet. Do you have to overcome some of your own prejudices to make Ammo work for you? Absolutely. But rather than being another program that rah-rah shish-goom-bahs tries to get you emotionally excited only to offer unclear methods, Ammo shows you how to design profitable ads step by step through a unique, never-before-tested formula. The founder, Steve Piper, is a data-loving, formula-driven author who escaped the kingdom of Amazon to build a platform for himself where he sold directly to his readers and built a loyal following. With Ammo, you know who's reading your books, how to contact them, and what they want to read next. If you've always been frustrated with Amazon's wall of mystery, of not knowing who's reading your books, of losing 50 to 70% of the hard-earned money you make through book sales, Ammo solves all of those problems by putting you in the driver's seat and showing you how to fulfill your books directly to your readerships. Click the link in the show notes to learn more. My guest on today's show is Debbie Russell, author of Crossing 51, Not Quite a Memoir. And I am going to give very little context because most of the context you need is going to be in the first few minutes of the conversation. But I do want to clarify one element of our conversation. And I love being a podcast host because I learn a ton from my guests and clarify misconceptions when I have them. So this is another case where I had been under the impression that just like with major booksellers, all pre-orders counted toward your bestseller ranking on publication day. However, after discussing this a little bit in the episode with Debbie, I went and did my research. So fact check here, it is true that pre-orders through booksellers and traditional retailers can often increase your chance of hitting a bestseller list because those numbers count toward your first week's sales. And this is all from booksforward.com. By the way, if you want to sort the size,
sort the size.
Cite the source. However, on Amazon, pre-orders are recorded the day of purchase rather than on release day. So any pre-orders you receive will not count toward your ranking on publication day. And that's a big deal because there are a ton of self-published authors specifically who may work really hard to pre-sell their book, and they don't even realize that it doesn't have a major impact on their rankings. It can obviously help with your Amazon rankings, but keep that in mind. I have done what I call guerrilla publishing for a little while now, where when a book is ready, I just adjust the publication date to fit whenever I want to publish. So you might notice if you've looked at my books on Amazon that I have a couple of pre-orders out there. It's my intention and my belief that I'll actually beat the publication date that I put there, but I gave myself a deadline, and I'm not going to and never have planned to do a big hoorah around any kind of book release at this point, because as a self-published author, there are already plenty of preconceived notions about who we are and what we do, but I definitely don't need to try to act like a traditionally published author where I am confined by rigid strictures and time frames and all that kind of stuff. If I can get my books edited, covers designed, layout formatted, and all of the good stuff, then I am more than happy to release it as soon as it's ready, not make you wait, not make you have to hold your breath for the next book. I'm just going to continue to write and try to get as many books out there as I possibly can. And I encourage you, if you're a self-published author, to do the same thing. Now, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Debbie Russell.
This is TRBM Ammo Edition. If you're a published author and want to make a living writing books and selling them to avid readers, you've come to the right place. There's simply no program that's more successful at driving readers towards the books you've written. So the only thing you have to worry about is writing a great book. And the system within Ammo takes care of the rest. Thanks for listening to this conversation.
So you are, and you don't even know this about yourself, or maybe you do in passing, but you are kind of the catalyst for a lot of the things that I'm doing right now. And I think that this is a testament to just being a kind human being who is aware of the world around them. Because I jumped onto Twitter as myself. I'd had a secret profile as the main character of my novel, but as myself, I was jumping onto Twitter with this idea of trying to grow a following, get my literary agent an extra boost so we could sell my book. And you are the person who introduced me to Jen LeMaster and a group of other very, at the time, active Twitter users who helped to boost my signal incredibly. And so people who've listened to the podcast for a while know that Twitter is kind of the backbone on which I built this podcast. I sell tons of books through Twitter. I'm kind of a rarity in that Twitter works really well for me. But none of that, and I mean this, none of that would have happened had you not introduced me to that group of people. It was great fortune. And I think on that frequently, and I owe you a debt of gratitude. So it's great fun to have you on the podcast now.
That's so cool. And because I think we came to Twitter around the same time, and I had no idea how to use it in any sort of professional sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a stealth account that's 10 years old that I use for an entirely different purpose.
Yeah.
And it's connections. I've made, a number of really cool connections that have helped me, and I hope helped the other person offline in different areas. And it gives me hope that the social media world is not going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah. I think it's the opposite in some ways. I did hear for a long time, and I don't hear this conversation as much because now that Twitter does kind of zoom along for me, I'm not as involved as I was for a very long time in the building phase of it. I organically draw a lot of followers now because my account is large. There's all kinds of things going on. But it used to be on a daily basis that I would hear from someone like Twitter is a toxic place. It's just a bunch of hatred and rumors and lies. And I think that place exists on Twitter, but it's almost the same kind of thing happening in real life. There are certain neighborhoods where you can live where there's a lot of toxic behavior going on. And there are certain neighborhoods where you can live where things are fairly wholesome. You can live in communities with shared interests. And I'm not even talking about cults. There's all of that going on as well. But there's great thriving places to be involved in Twitter. And if you involve yourself there and ignore or navigate away from the bad stuff, really cool things can happen.
It is what you make it, I believe.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your book generally before we start talking about some of the marketing efforts that you have done. I haven't had too many memoirists on before, and your book is a memoir that in many ways reminds me of my maternal side of the family's sort of story. And I connected with it really deeply because of that. Talk to me a little bit about why you felt this book needed to be in the world.
Well, it started with my grandfather's story, which, as you know, is half of the book. I go back and forth between current times and then late 1951 into 52, when my grandfather spent 4 months voluntarily in a locked drug rehab facility run by the feds. And he, at the time, was a 51-year-old doctor, kind of high society in San Diego. And he had become addicted to Demerol and morphine and barbiturates. I mean, it was really quite astonishing. And I thought that story in and of itself could have been its own book. And I think if I were a better writer as far as fiction and turning it into, I think it could just be a really amazing story. But then as my dad went into hospice and I found my own life kind of heading into uncharted waters, I started just keeping track of what was going on for me. And then after my dad died, after I left my old job as a county prosecutor, and I set out to look at what this book should be, I decided it needed to be both stories. And
Yeah.
that was a little ambitious at the time for one's first attempt at writing a book. But I'm really pleased with how it came out, because through sort of researching my grandfather and his character traits, his personality, I was able to find my own, my own identity. And especially in light of sort of some of the antagonism from my mother. I mean, she certainly played the role of antagonist. I'm the protagonist. She's the antagonist. So that's in a nutshell kind of how it became these two stories braided into one.
Yeah. Yeah, I never would have thought when you said that maybe a greater writer could have told the one story with fictional methods and models. I don't know that I agree with you there. I think that the story is perfect as is. Yes, I agree with you that your grandfather's story is ripe for a novel, but it's a totally different thing. I think that you lose some of the heart of it, and maybe drive it more toward being a thriller, sort of a fast-paced intrigue. And there's nothing wrong with that. I write that kind of fiction quite a bit, but I love the heart behind this book, the self-exploration, the exploration of the family. One thing that I'm really currently in the middle of, so I don't know that I have formed opinions about it, but I feel like as a society right now, we're too far listing toward individuality and not enough toward corporate existence or like family units or friend groups, that our identity is so deeply enmeshed in the group that we're in. And that's part of the self. You can't really pull it apart. I feel like we want to pretend that we can, but we are a product of our environment as well. Was that something that you were thinking about when you were writing?
Oh, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I do think that the pandemic certainly exacerbated all of this, in that people with families were stuck with their families. And I say that a little tongue in cheek, because I believe there's likely more dysfunction in families than there is function. And I never realized that until I started really exploring what it meant to be in a dysfunctional family, because I didn't view my family as dysfunctional, although there were times that I thought, boy, we're different from other people's families. But the thing is, you don't know what other people's families are like unless you sit down and have a conversation with somebody about their family, right? And who gets together and wants to talk about their family? Usually, like you said, when we're getting together with friends or other people outside of our families, we're not really wanting to say, oh, this thing with my mom, or oh my gosh, this thing with my brother, or any of that's just not conversation that people generally want to spend time with. And so we all kind of become isolated in our ideas of family and what family is supposed to be versus what it actually is. And I think with the pandemic, with everybody sort of, they had nowhere to go to get away from their families. And so everything got really, really exacerbated, right?
Yeah. And you're right. And there's pros and cons to it, because what you're saying is that when you live inside of a dysfunctional family, some of your dysfunction has a much easier time running rampant and causing issues. I live, and I was just talking about this with some newer friends of mine. I live in a town of 900, so like you, you're even more rural than I am, but it's a very small town north of Omaha, between there and Sioux City. And I would say that, for one, the most influential, powerful people in the town are my in-laws. one guy founded an auction company, and his son inherited that after a generation of making it really big, auctioning farm equipment. So really expensive equipment that brings in a lot of money. And so he has like what can only be described as a compound on the top of the hill as you're driving into town. His house is enormous. They've got a giant building with a basketball court in it and an upstairs entertainment. Like it's just pool tables, everything you think of. He has his own pool. He looks out over a lake that his grandfather dug out, and it's amazing to be part of the family. I love it. I've talked about it on this podcast. I'm aware of my privilege in having that. But at the same time, we were joking at the lake yesterday, hanging out with some friends. I said, if anything ever were to go wrong with my wife, and thank God I can't see that happening, I would be in the world's worst position because suddenly my in-laws would basically be able to just blacklist me. I would have to move. I would have no access to my children. It could be a nightmare. It's really funny, the power of people groups. So that doesn't necessarily play into your story as much, but it, I think, highlights this idea of just the power of human group dynamics.
Well, and families of influence. I mean, let's just, for a second, think about if there were to be a scandal that was associated with that family, right? Because that's what we're kind of dealing with my grandfather and the fact that he went to this facility for 4 months and nobody really knew about it. And then he got back and things just kind of picked up. And I've come to learn now, and I've gotten a whole trove of newspaper articles. That family, my dad's family, was the family that was written about in the society section of the San Diego paper. And I now have all these articles. It's the one where, my dad, Ralph Russell, just got back from his European trip and is, residing for the summer with his parents. I mean, that kind of stuff where I was not aware of all those newspaper articles because I just didn't have access to them when I was writing the book. And they've now become available to me in a whole different context. And it now really reinforces the fact that this thing that happened with my grandfather was something that they just really didn't want to be broadcast. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to San Diego, and my aunt, we're doing a library presentation with all the people she grew up with and all this. And I'm so proud of her because she's had to transition from, I don't know if I want the world to know about this to, I want the world to know about this, and I'm really proud of my grandfather.
Wow.
And it's been
beautiful.
It's been a really interesting development over the course of having this book in the world.
Yeah. Wow. So this is a good, at least, starting point to kind of tease out a little bit of what you've been able to do through marketing. I think that based on some of our email communications, you don't necessarily think that your book had a huge splash. But if you're comfortable sharing, tell how many pre-orders you had and how many copies you've sold so far, because it's actually really strong numbers and a lot of listeners will be envious.
Well, and I think I appreciate you saying that, Jody, because, one of the hardest parts I'm finding with this whole journey is how do we define success, right?
Yep.
And so, right. I mean, and as somebody who's just a newbie and has no idea, I don't know these things. So I do not have my July numbers at this point. So my book came out June 20th. In May, I sold 86 books, almost evenly distributed. I think it was 48 soft covers, 38 hardcovers. And then in June, I sold 266 books. And so my total at the end of June is 352 books. I still don't have any ebook numbers. And right. And we could talk about that in a second because that whole promotion was kind of a mess.
Yeah.
But I've had enough people say that's awesome. So I'm going to accept that that's
It
awesome,
is.
right? I didn't,
Absolutely.
but of course, I've looked at Amazon and I wanted so desperately to be a number one bestseller in one of
Hmm.
my categories, and that has not happened.
Yep.
I was a number one new release for a minute, and I guess that's fine.
That's
So,
amazing.
it's just interesting how we define success, right?
Yes, very much. It's a question I ask a lot. Going back to Twitter a little bit, I used to ask that question intentionally honestly every week for a while. I would sneak in a tweet about success because I am fascinated with the question of success. And I think sometimes, this is just my observations over however long, I think sometimes when you're on the perceived bottom of success, then and I'm not saying I'm not talking about the royal you or the corporate you right now. You have this tendency to say that success is not the number of books you sell, or it's not the number of people you reach, or the amount of dollars you make from said thing. It's the feeling you have inside. And I'm not diminishing that as being a part of success, but I've rarely seen somebody on the top side of success not incorporate some of the physical rewards of that success. That being said, if you are a drug addicted person who is in a very successful family and has had a successful career, and you put yourself into drug treatment and you beat the drugs addiction and you get back to normal life, and you have an apparent step back in your life in certain ways, you're successful because you beat a demon that could have killed you. And so that's for me where the nuance is that people looking in cannot tell you what success is. But when you look out, it's a lot easier to talk about success when you're on the top of your success mountain. Does that mesh with your experience at all, or where am I missing it?
No, absolutely. And I think, through the past couple months, as the book has gone out and been in the hands of other readers, um, the individual messages that I have been getting from people, and then sort of there's a theme that's running through the reviews, at least the ones on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
Where people are finding that my book is relatable,
Mm.
and you were one of them who
Yeah.
wrote about, being able to reflect on your own family. And you're not the only one. There's a whole bunch in there. And so I started to think about, because I think memoir, the danger with memoir is I'm just going to write this thing about what happened to me. And then you, the reader, will read it and either be interested to an extent, might get bored after a while because there's just nothing that's drawing you, the reader, in. It's like you're sitting looking through a window at something happening. And so I am grateful that this unique story that I put together is something that is resonating with people who have had different experiences, some far more extreme than what I wrote about, but yet they relate to it. And so when I think about success, I am I've tried to get away from the way Amazon wants us to think about success,
Mm-hmm.
and just drill into the connecting with readers, and then allowing readers to connect with each other and to have these conversations, and to do more writing around that. And
Mm.
every time I get a new subscriber to my newsletter, that's a piece of success. And I will say, as I'm gradually getting outside of my own personal network, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where I get a new
Yes.
subscriber to my
Strangers.
newsletter and I think, well, I don't know who that. Yes, yes. So I will say this. I As soon as I can get a review on Amazon that is from someone that I do not know at all. And I thought I had gotten one. The last one I got, I was like, I don't recognize this person. I don't know anything about, and then I come
Mm.
to find out, oh, it was the husband of somebody else who, and
Yes.
so I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, so, right. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, it's getting expanding that sphere to the next level out, if that
Absolutely.
makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. It's something I haven't talked about enough on this podcast. because there is one tier where you're able to, and I don't love the words, but mobilize your family, friends, and friends of family type of network, people there where you recognize their names, you know who they are. That's all fine and great. And a lot of people actually can't even do that. They're too scared to ask a friend to buy their book. And so I think a lot of people get caught with maybe 5 reviews or less on Amazon because they're afraid to ask their immediate friends and family. But what you're talking about is then getting out of the atmosphere of your planetary connections and actually getting into space, because that's where people who don't know Debbie at all are going to start to evaluate your book, and they don't have any loyalty to be kind to you. So their kindness, if it is kindness, is earned in a way that kind of buoys you, and their cruelty hurts because it's so raw, it's so honest. It's really tough. But where you're at of finding strangers, sure, that's when you can really make a massive impact.
Right, exactly.
Do you have more to add to that? Because I mean, that's where you're at right now. You're in this place of trying to find strangers. Are there specific things that you're doing outside of the work with your publisher?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about the marketing course that I took.
Yeah.
And how the results were not what I had hoped for. Well, but it was interesting. And I would love to sort of dissect this with you.
Yes.
To get your thoughts on it. Because again, when you're starting out with this, my biggest strength that I will just put right out there is my curiosity. And so when I made the decision that I'm going to publish this book and I'm going to try to have some reach with it, as opposed to I'm just going to write this for my family, right? You make that decision early on. Yes. Then it's sort of like, okay, so I need to learn about marketing. I need to learn about, maybe getting an agent, finding a publisher, all those things.
Yeah.
And so I early on really started researching the marketing side of it. And I have a bunch of books, and and I asked other authors. And so one author that I have gotten to be very good friends with, she recommended, his name is Tim Grahl, Grahl, and he has a program, wait for it, launch a bestseller.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are you familiar with this?
It's one I don't know. I know a ton, but I don't know that one. I probably should, but I don't.
All right. Well, see, isn't that interesting? Right?
Yeah.
So I had started, he's got a website, and you can sign up and you get his newsletter. I mean, that's the whole thing we all do, right? You get the newsletter, and then you start, he will do webinars. He does free stuff. And, after a while with the free stuff, he, starts promoting the stuff you have to pay for.
Yeah.
So I had done a webinar, I think it was last summer. And the interesting thing about marketing and publicity campaigns, and this is the part I still don't understand, but I guess if you can find the people who will pay for it, but the average, it seems, for a publicity / marketing campaign is $3,000 to $5,000 a month for a minimum of 3 months. Like you can't hire somebody to just do a few things. You have to commit to a 3-month campaign at this, to me, just a really exorbitant rate. And so one of the things that Tim Grahl offers is the DIY marketing program. And I thought, you know what? I have the time, and I have the giddy up. And so I'm going to do this. And so what was really good about it, and you see these common threads through all marketing, where they say a year to 9 months before your book comes out is when you start, right? And so for me, the big difference between me and people who self-publish is, if you're self-publishing, you have all the control over when your book is going to come out. And so then you can just kind of organize everything to be in line with that launch date. And you can change your launch date, if things are not going the way you want, or they are, and you want to.
Yep.
And so with going with my publisher, I was given my launch date of June 20th.
Mm-hmm.
And so, 6 to 9 months in advance, you're identifying your influencers, you're trying to get your book into early readers so you can get ARCs, ARC reviewers, and you're looking for influencers, and you're creating a media kit. So there were all these things, and I dutifully did each and every one of them. And he does nice modules as far as what an influencer looks like and what you want to try to do and how to pitch them and all that kind of stuff. And I had started a newsletter back in, I want to say it was early 2022. March of 2022 is when I started my newsletter. And so again, I kind of did all of this. I did my outreach. I worked on my website. I got all this stuff. And then he has a very intensive pre-order campaign. And I think in hindsight, I think this is geared more to people who write nonfiction, how-to books, people who have something to offer besides a good story. I just don't know. Right. I just don't know. I think, and I look at my book more along the lines of fiction than your business book or your how-to book or whatever. Yeah. Because finding the readers, that is the key, right? It's who are your readers?
Yes.
And of course, memoir readers are my readers, but I've now had people like you, for instance, I don't think you seek out memoir, right? But you liked
I've read a bunch of it, but it's not my first choice.
Right. So I do look at that as such a critical piece of this. But so he has you set up in your newsletter, and I suspect because you are a subscriber of mine that you were the victim. I call it a victim because I'm a person who really has struggled with the frequency of newsletters and how often to do them, and are they getting read or what's happening. But his whole premise is that you offer a gift to people who pre-order your book, right? It's the incentive to get them to pre-order your book. And so I put all this time and effort into creating a workbook called What's Your Story? And it's designed, it's got 12 pages, 12 questions, one for each month of the year. And it's just for people to either do themselves as a journal, take to their parents, to ask their parents, do with friends. I mean, it's a way to get people to think about who they are and what's important to them and all that. Because I've decided that my whole premise, theory, reason for this book, reason for promoting this book is that we are stronger when we share our stories as opposed to when we keep them hidden because of shame or any other reason that we don't want to share our stories. And so I start this, and I followed it right down to the letter. And what I learned, and I wish I would have learned this sooner, I had thought that when my book launched on June 20th, all those pre-orders would count on that day.
Yes.
And so when you think about it, I had 300 pre-orders.
Right.
And can you imagine if they all counted on that day?
Yeah. So they count for the week of, in the like Nielsen book scan, and for bestseller lists like the New York Times bestseller list, the defunct, no longer existing USA Today bestseller list. They count for
Today.
Yes, right. It's gone, but it used to be. I mean, I still have friends. In fact, a guy that I know quite well has made the list and still advertises it because a lot of regular readers don't know it doesn't exist anymore. It counts for all of the book scan lists, but where you're talking about is it doesn't count on Amazon unless it was sold through Amazon. And in probably so many cases, your book went through your publisher, is my guess.
No, that's
No,
the
it
other
didn't.
thing, that
Okay.
I need to be clear about. No.
Okay.
My publisher doesn't do any of that. And that was something I knew going in.
Hmm.
So what I've viewed myself, we talk about hybrid publishers,
Hmm.
and hybrid is how I have viewed myself, because I have tried to learn as much as I could about self-publishing, because
Hmm.
I wanted to do all the things that I felt like I needed to do for self-publishing,
Hmm.
and just kind of knowing that it's not like my publisher is going to order a print run of X number of books and ship them all out to all different places. That
Yeah.
does not happen.
Yeah.
And additionally, huge point, when I first launched, I was under the impression, because I had been told, that my publisher was not allowing returns. And so my ideas for going into bookstores and all of that, it was going to be a consignment basis. It felt
Mhm.
like a lot of work. And I was focused on Amazon. And again, what I learned was that the pre-orders, they count the day that they are ordered.
Hmm.
So that's where I would hit those number one new release categories before my book was even out, because on a certain day maybe 5 people all ordered the book, and that
Interesting.
just catapulted me to number one on that day. But when I think back now, I would have much rather had those after the book was out,
So I
right?
need I need to dive
And geared
in
it.
to the fine print on Amazon, because as far as I understand, Amazon actually has fine print in their KDP publishing resources that says that every book that sells pre-order counts the day the book goes live. You don't even get any money for those sales until your book is live and the books start being distributed. So I want to check into that. Well, I'll put a pin in it if I remember to talk about the hardcover sales, because there is something strange that happens there. But okay, so we're just going to do a quick check to see where this happens, because I think that there's nuance to this, but I do believe you're also right that it's harder to track sales to a specific day for that whole street team and launch date and people saying you're going to hit the bestseller lists.
Right, right. And again, I think and I just did a Google search around this. And
Mm-hmm.
then sadly, after the fact, I was told, or I learned, that as a debut author with a standalone book,
Mm.
it's pre-orders are not necessarily the way to go. If you
Right.
if you write for a series, um, then you've got a lot of that works in your favor that way. So
Yes.
again, I feel like after all was said and done, and then again, here's the thing where, not being a KDP author myself, we were trying to get my Kindle book reduced to 99 cents on my day of launch.
Yeah,
It didn't
absolutely.
happen.
Okay.
And that was
Wow.
a huge, and I had no control over that, right? So I
Yeah.
kept bugging the publisher, and they kept saying, it's Ingram. Ingram's doing this, or Amazon's doing this, or, it
Hmm.
was something where, and this is the hard part when you're trying to work with a publisher, because that is a hurdle or a wall,
Yes.
that you can't get through to take care of yourself. Like I think for self-published authors, there's a number to call, there's an email, there's a
Hmm.
contact, something where you can directly impact what's happening. I
Yeah.
could not do that except to continue to pester my publisher. And and again, I had sent my newsletter on the day of launch said, hey, it's 99 cents, except it
Yeah. Oh
wasn't.
no.
And oh
Oh,
my God, it was just, and then all the people that were pre-ordering were getting a message that said, the shipment of your book is being delayed. Do you
mhm.
want to continue? And I
Oh
thought, what
no.
on earth is actually happening? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Jody, and so when we talk about defining success, like, I remember that day just bravely posting my post, like, happy book day to me, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, you must be so excited. And I'm like, this is the worst day of my life.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
seriously, it was the whole behind the behind the scenes of all of that stuff was all I could think about. And it's a
Yes.
sad state of my mental health that's what I focused on, as opposed to
Hmm.
your book is in the world. I mean, nope, that did not
No.
happen for me
Yeah.
that day. Nope.
Yeah. So I want to talk about all of this as a whole, but you mentioned early on that there was maybe more to the ebook aspect as well. Was it just that 99-cent piece, or were there other things going on with the ebook that also sort of sabotaged your numbers?
Again, because I haven't seen the numbers,
Hmm.
I have no idea how many ebooks I've sold, right?
Yeah.
I met some former colleagues last week for lunch, and the ones that had bought a book brought it for me to sign, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
one of my former colleagues, he's like, "Well, I've got he says I have a half hour left on the Kindle." So I know that he ordered a Kindle, right?
Yeah.
So I what I'm told, again, this is a website or a portal that is set up by my publisher. And so again, I am waiting for them to somehow input those numbers for me to get any sort of sense of what my sales are for that. I just don't know.
Yeah.
And so I'll be happy to get those numbers to you when I actually can see them. But it's just an interesting lack of, what do we call that? That's just a hole where I don't have any information about that. And, fortunately or unfortunately, I have a wonderful network of people who I believe bought my books simply to support me, right?
Yes.
And that's where I'm circling back to this. Now it's time to try to get to the next. What did you say? You go from the atmosphere out to space?
Yeah. Basically.
Right? That's
Yeah.
my next challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I want to then talk about, I want to talk about your publisher, and I'm going to put on my listening ears in a major way, and I may ask some questions for clarification. If there becomes a point where you don't want to talk about it, or you feel that it would be harmful to your relationship with your publisher, I will cut anything from this conversation that doesn't feel like it represents you in the perfectly best way. So let's go forward as boldly as possible and make cuts later if necessary. Does that sound okay?
That sounds perfect.
Alrighty. So you've talked about hybrid publishing, and there is a nefarious and I think kind of shady segment of the publishing world right now where they realized that being called vanity presses was not beneficial to their marketing plan. And so at least half, if not more, of presses that were formerly called vanity now call themselves hybrid. So every time I hear the word, I start listening for signs that you're with a true hybrid versus a vanity. So tell me a little bit about the structure of your deal with your publisher. Start off with what percentage of manuscripts that were sent to them get rejected for quality control?
What I was told, you've asked it, what percentage have been rejected. So I believe it's somewhere around 70%.
Okay.
At least that's what I was told.
Okay.
That they will take on, I think it was 30 to 40% is what they said. So I guess 60 to 70% is rejected then.
Okay. And then once they offer you a contract to take your book on, does part of the contract language require you to pay any money upfront for any services?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a couple of things that I want to say from here. One is that is the definition of a vanity press. If you don't have an option to come on free, then it's vanity. There are some publishers out there who have two tiers, and they'll let you know. They'll say your book falls into the tier where you need to pay for our publishing package, and these are the services we'll offer you for doing that. Or they'll say your book qualifies to be under our main imprint, and we're going to cover all the costs of these things, but just understand we won't do any marketing for you. That's the traditional setup of a hybrid publisher. If their only offer for you is you have to pay, then they're what was formerly called a vanity press. And the reason I highlight this is not to diminish the position you're in, because I think that vanity presses are poo-pooed on far too much. There's some things that they do amazingly, but you highlighted one of the key things that they need to adapt to if they're going to continue to exist. And that's that they have to give you 100% transparency between the numbers and you so that you can adjust like somebody who's self-published, but with the benefits of an imprint, because you can't overstate the value of having an imprint that is not your own name. You just lose a lot of opportunities. So talk to me a little bit about what you're hearing, because I'm always afraid if I have this conversation with somebody that they're going to feel angry at me or defensive. And also, like I said, I want my listening ears on. Have I misconstrued your situation at all? Because maybe I missed a detail.
Well, I think so. Here's what I would say. They do offer traditional publishing to an author who is established. And actually, in my case, if I am able to sell 2,000 books, they will take me on for my next book with a traditional contract.
That's hybrid. Okay.
So, right. So, and again, going through hybrid versus vanity, to me, the Independent Book Publishers Association is a great resource in terms of trying to suss out vanity from hybrid.
Yeah.
Because and Kohler, my publisher, is a member in good standing and an active member at that of IPBA or IBPA, Independent Book Publishing Association. And I'm going to back up for a second, simply because as I started down the road of publishing, I initially wanted to find an agent and go traditional, and very quickly realized that, I'm a nobody. And right now, with what agents are looking for with such a unique story or something that's so incredibly different, especially in the memoir genre, I was just never gonna, there was just no chance. Or, I could keep querying for, 3 years. And then it was sort of the timing of things too. It was like, I don't want to spend the next 5 years waiting for my book to come out. And so I started to look at books, and then I realized that I was actually buying books off of Amazon from presses, and then I would look to see, and there's a hybrid press called She Writes Press, and it highlights women authors, and it was one that I had considered as well. And again, they vet the submissions, and I think that's a huge difference between vanity and hybrid is vetting the submissions, because there's a lot of not great writing out there. Yes. And again, you can find someone somewhere who will publish your book for the right amount, or you can, self-publish. But I think that's an important distinction, again, between vanity and hybrid. And I was able to reach out to some authors from both of these publishers, just so you know, and just find out what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought was helpful, if they had regrets. And again, that's the important stuff. Like, just reach out to people who, if you're considering a certain publisher, reach out and just, people are willing, I think, to share their stories. People want to be helpful, as I'm wanting to be in this conversation with you. And so I actually submitted to them and then withdrew my submission because I decided, well, the price point was interesting, because the price point with Kohler is, to me, what I would expect to pay for a really, really good cover. And I'll tell you what, this cover for my book, as well as the layout, is a dream come true. I don't know that I ever could have conveyed to anyone what I wanted and have it, You know what I mean? It just,
Absolutely.
and so again, and when people, and you know this as well as I do, we see these folks on social media trying to figure out where to go for a cover and how to do it, or they're doing their own or whatever.
Yeah.
And again, I just think that with that, and then with getting certainly a copy edit done, as well as I received 20 soft cover arcs, I received 10 hardcover arcs. When I look at all of what I got for what I paid, I feel like it was appropriate. I mean, and you talk about transparency. The contract is really transparent as far as what I am getting for the money that I'm paying, and what my royalties are. It's just all really, really clear. And I'm getting 60% royalties on hardcover, softcover, well, on everything. But it's off the wholesale price, of course. And so I felt comfortable. I felt really comfortable.
Yeah.
And I got a fair amount of collaboration with it that you don't get with traditional publishing. I mean, when I think about, when you submit to an agent who then asks you to revise and resubmit, and then your concept just gets whittled away and whittled away and whittled, and then the editor at the publisher says, well, this is good, but I see it going in this direction.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, is it really the product that you wrote in the first place? This, in my case, I feel like I did an extensive revision between the time that they accepted me and the time that they asked for the manuscript, where I cut about 25 pages, mostly of my grandfather's letters. And because the biggest critique of the manuscript back then was that the letters tended to get redundant and drag the whole story down. And so I just, and again, as far as the cover, I had input as far as what I liked, or what I was thinking of, what my aesthetic was around it all. They have you do an extensive author questionnaire, which you've got to talk about. How are you going to promote this? And what do you see for the cover? And what's your bio? And, I had to put a lot of work into it as though I were self-publishing, but I don't mind that. I mean, that jacket copy, that's my jacket copy. They tweaked it here and there, but my bio is my bio. And again, I feel like I'm good at some of this stuff. And so maybe somebody who's not quite as skilled, their product might not be as nice, or they might have paid more for this extra help. I think with these contracts, at least my understanding is they are unique to each author. So I was told from the get-go, my manuscript was strong and clean, but that's because I had worked with a developmental editor from the jump. And so the thing I was presenting was in pretty good shape. But I think for others who might need more editing or more support, they might be charged more. I don't know. It's not what I was told is it's not a one size fits all.
Right.
So again, I felt like that was fair, right?
Okay, so a couple of things, and I'm really grateful, because it's clear to me two things. One, I did touch on a nerve, and so I want to apologize. I think that's always the case if I have, sorry, I'm coughing. I think it's always the case that if I discuss the question of the publisher, I will touch on a nerve, but it's also clear to me that your level of thinking this through was where I would expect for a prosecutor's level of thinking something to be at. And I appreciate that. And I think that it helps to highlight for the listeners what's happening when you make your decisions. So first off, I would like to say that I would have gone with a straight up vanity publisher for my books under a number of different circumstances and have absolutely no heartburn about it. Yours is absolutely a hybrid publisher. They're further toward what I think is vanity in that their acceptance numbers are higher than the traditional publishers will be, even small indie presses that don't offer any kind of pay to publish opportunity. But there's so many things that they're doing for you that are really fantastic, that are services added. And the conversation that seems to come back over and over and over on this podcast is the level of work that you want to do on the marketing sales side of the book, the design, the layout, all of those functions versus the level of independence that you want to have to make everything your way and take all of the responsibility for every single movement in self-publishing. And still to this day, for me, one of my favorite guests, I mention her all the time. I hope I've sold some books just by word of mouth for her, but Libby Hawker, Libby Grant, she has a couple of pseudonyms. She said to me, and this isn't exactly my format, but she said, all I do is I wake up in the morning, I write for 5 hours, and I live on the beach. So I go outside, I sit on the beach with a book, I smoke pot, and I read for the rest of the day. And I, sub out the pot for something else, maybe a delicious beverage, but essentially she's living the life of a writer. And I would say that you and I both are hybrid writers. I mean, we're trying to market our own work. And I will admit that right now in my life, there's a huge imbalance. I market far more than I write.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So
I'm still, I'm committed to writing my little blog posts, which I very much appreciate you getting me over to Substack. And I believe I'm going to, in September, move my whole newsletter over to Substack, and then looking at possibly adding a level of paid subscriptions. I mean, that's a big step, because and again, it's that whole, my writing's not worth anything. Well, you know what it is? It actually is. And I have people that, like, they wait for my newsletter to come out. They love every single thing I write. And so it's like, well, if you can pay $5 a month for this, I will give you more content. And then the other people just get the monthly thing that I've been doing now for over a year. But I mean, and again, I sort of like you, I don't need the money from the book. And I'm never going to make back what I put into it. I've kind of looked at this as,
no, you will.
It's my
you will.
startup
Don't say
business,
that.
right?
You will. You will make your money back. I believe that about you.
I think what's interesting though is, my brand is lawyer turned writer, right? And so I just did a radio show last week where the interviewer asked me, she's like, so are you still prosecuting? Are you still doing this or that? And I said, no. And in fact, I think this is the year I'm going to let my law license go. And that's going to be a big deal for me, where I've really made the transition. But I'm fortunate in that I don't have money to burn, because I do want to just touch back up on this vanity hybrid publishing stuff, because I do believe there is a big swath of writers out there that are my age or older, who have always had the dream to write a book, right? And when you use the word vanity publishing, and you didn't really hit a nerve. So I just want you to be aware of that. I really appreciated this conversation, because I want to be able to explain all the thought that I put into trying to decide where I wanted to go. Because I did have an offer. I had an offer from a teeny tiny press, small press. But that's a whole other conversation, because teeny tiny, small traditional presses are fragile. They're very fragile.
Yes.
And one person leaving or quitting, and your book is, not going anywhere. I mean, it was that was a whole other, we could talk about that some other time, but I made that decision. I made a decision that because I had said, I'm not going to pay to have my book published.
Right.
And after having my interactions with this publisher, who just, it got weird. It got very, very weird. And they've put out books, and I have one of the books, and they're very nice books. but I don't
Yeah.
know what was going on in that. Right. And so, but getting back to this, there's a lot of retirees with a lot of money to spend.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that will not drop an eye at spending money on a publisher, spending money on a publicist, spending money on marketing. I mean, that's it for them, I'd say. If that's your dream to get your book out and
Hmm.
you find the way to do it and you have the money to spend on it, that's
Hmm.
fantastic.
Right.
I don't have that kind of money. So that was
Yeah.
another reason that I chose Kohler, because their price point to me, I wasn't going to be spending much more on that than if I had
Hmm.
tried to hire out all these,
Right.
like you just said,
That's right. That's right.
all the parts to putting a book together.
Yep. It's unreal what goes into self-publishing. I spend at least half of the time on this podcast that feels like dedicated to talking to authors who self-publish, saying the worst disservice you can do to yourself is to hit publish without having paid for an editor, paid for some kind of layout format. I've slowly come around on cover design to where I do think that there's more room for self-cover design with some of the tools that we have now. However, I still, like you said, I think $3,000 to $5,000 for publishing a book is only reasonable. I take objection to your idea that you'll never earn back on your book, because I think that you will. And before I forget this, I just want to go back and plant something in your mind for your curiosity to chew on a little bit. I would encourage you to self-publish your newsletter. Take your favorite 10 to 15 newsletters and put them inside of a book called Essays. You figure out the title, self-publish it quietly to Amazon, and then go to a place called Book Funnel. My listeners probably know it pretty well because I use it as well.
Oh, yeah.
If you are
Yep.
using Book Funnel, great. But then use that, because you were talking earlier about like a lead magnet. This is the best lead magnet you have. You've already done all the work for it, other than putting together a cover and compiling them. And then so put that together as a book, and then find author swaps on BookFunnel. I think it costs I can't remember the cost. It's very, very cheap to have a mid-tier membership to BookFunnel. And I bring in, on average right now, about 300 emails a month from author swaps that I do for my books. And it's a really great way to build your list. And then you pour all of those emails that you gather right back into your Substack, and you just keep writing your newsletter. People are getting exactly what they signed up for. You will build your list really quickly. And I know you already have a pretty impressive list, but it's something I think you should look into. It's not very expensive, and it's one of the most powerful marketing tools that I have that costs me virtually nothing.
I have to just say something about BookFunnel, because this is just so funny. And this is sort of like one of the other little, I don't want to call it a fight, that's not the right word, but a little challenge that I had with the publisher, because when I got my digital ARC, and I want to put that in quotes, it was a PDF, right?
Yeah.
And so most of my ARC readers had no problem with that, but I had a couple that they're like, we want what is it called? The
EPUB. Yeah, eMobi or EPUB. Yep.
EPUB file, right?
Yep.
So I go back to the publisher and I say, hey, can I get that? Nope, because this is proprietary and this and that and blah, blah, blah. So and that's what you use, I believe, to get it through BookFunnel. A PDF is just not, that doesn't work that way. So, but I will say this. So I belong to a Facebook group called We Love Memoirs, and it's based out of Australia. So, I mean, these are people that are not here in the US.
Yeah.
And they do promotions and they do giveaways and all this stuff. But in order to do a giveaway, you've got to have that EPUB file.
Yeah.
So I went back to my publisher just last week and I said, look, this is a huge swath of people. I mean, there's 7,000 members in this group, but we're not allowed to self-promote. We're only allowed to, participate in the things that the group sets up and all of this, but you do giveaways and you can be on. I have an author day reserved in September. And they finally gave me my EPUB file. So I was like, oh, well, And so to hear you say this, because I remember at the time, somebody had said, "Oh yeah, set it up through BookFunnel," and I'm like, I can't. I don't
Yeah.
have the. But wow, Jody, that is a great idea, and it's not as much work as at first I'm like, oh, and then I'm like, no,
Right.
that's not that much work. What I
No.
love about you, Jody, is just you're like, you can do this. It's not a big deal. Because of my
Yeah.
overthinking, I am immediately like, I can't do this. I can't do this. And then I have to get myself sort of shored up to like, yes, you can. Look at all these other things you've done.
Yeah.
But you've got to be in a good headspace to and there's been so much that I've been doing that I feel like I'm just treading water some days just to keep up with everything, which is not a bad thing. But again, the winter's coming and I'm actually looking forward to winter because there's not so much I have to do outside and all my other, keeping up the estate and everything else, because I appreciate this. And it's like, yeah, this is how I will find my readers, because it's the people because I'll get a little note or two after every newsletter. Oh, I really liked this, or this just made my day to get and I'm like, wow, that's great,
Yeah.
and I just need to. There's more of those people, right? How many people live in the world? Like, how many billions of people, right? And it's just a matter of getting those folks who really live for what I write, because it's kind of niche and it's sort of what I think about. But I'm going to be transitioning into more lawyerly stuff because my next book is going to be about one of my biggest cases that I prosecuted. So
Oh, I
that's
love
going to
it.
open a whole, I think, yeah. People like you are going to be like, give me it. It's
Yeah,
going to be great.
exactly. I was going to say, do you expect yourself then to try to do a little bit more fictionalizing with that, or are you going to stick to closer to memoir?
I gotta say, man, fictionalizing feels so hard. And I think
Yeah.
it's just because I am this straightforward person. Like I don't know how to couch the truth in any, for better or for worse, right? So
Yeah.
what I'm going to be doing though with this one is I will be running it by an actual libel lawyer, because there's going to be, in this, I'm Minneapolis, St. Paul, and people are going to know who I'm talking about. The real names are going to be out there. But the good news is that it was highly publicized. I have the whole case file, which has the trial transcript. So all of this is like public. And all it is going to be me sort of, talking about it. Like, here's my
Yeah.
opinion of this thing that's right there. And so what I've learned with memoir is opinions are not, they're not, it's not, and I'm not going to defame anybody, but I'm just going to have enough in there that is going to be my perception of the case, of the two tiers of justice when you have money versus the people that don't. And this is all stuff that's not anything that's, novel. It's just that it's going to be me and what happened to me and my
Yeah.
case. So,
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to read the book when it's written and comes out. I do really enjoy that. A couple of people I'm thinking about that, if you haven't dug into them, I think that you'd like them. Is Joanne Beard. I think you would really enjoy the essays and nonfiction of Joanne Beard. She's somebody who's crossed over just a little bit to write some fiction, but she wrote a book called The Boys of My Youth. I just mentioned it in a conversation I had with somebody recently. And I also mentioned this, but I went to see her give a reading at the University of Nebraska in Omaha. She was a guest lecturer and then a reader for a short period of time. And during the Q&A, I don't pipe up in those situations very often because I have a bit of social anxiety, especially when I'm not in the spotlight. I don't know what happens when I'm in the spotlight, but I lose a little bit of that social anxiety. But a crowd member, I feel like everybody turns to look at me and the question better be amazing. And I was really fortunate that her answer was amazing because I said, hey, as a memoirist, where's the line for you about telling fact and using a piece of fiction to get at truth. And her response to me was, I do that all the time. I fictionalize things all the time. And she said, I don't bend the events so much as I bend the setting of the events. And she talked about this red velvet chair, this red upholstered velvet chair in a scene in one of her essays. And I'm not going to give any specifics because I'd love for people to read all of her work and find that chair and then relate to this moment. But she said, the scene is so understated that I needed to put something in there that popped really loud, almost like a bright flashing red light. And she said, so a red upholstered velvet chair did the trick. And she said, it changed the perception of how the rest of that essay read because she highlighted that moment, the person sitting in that chair. And suddenly something that was factual became more truthful because the reader's eyes or the mental focus shifted to that place. So that's where I think I'm sure that we all misrepresent our memories unintentionally, but I love the idea of intentionally doing so to get at a deeper something.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm going to look into that. She sounds fascinating.
She is. She's a wonderful writer too. She has an essay that she talks about the dying of her dog. And they play this game called Maserati, where it just sits kind of next to her, kind of in her lap, and she grabs its snout and shifts through the gears of a Maserati. There's so many. I know, yeah, and it's a great homage to a dog that she loved. She's a great writer. All right, let's see. So I guess the last thing I want to talk about is, and this can be a little bit more brief because we are kind of wrapping up naturally now. When it comes to some of the restrictions you have for marketing, one thing you said you're doing is library readings. How much are you trying to get out? How far do you want to go? And what's your experience there to be in public?
Well, again, I've just started with it, and I've really enjoyed your podcast interview with Eric Simmons.
Eric Otis Simmons.
Yes. Yes. And so, again, this is what's so great when we can put the time into, listening and then following up with the show notes. And I ordered his package.
Awesome.
I had gotten a Midwest book review. That is one of the kind of the creme de la creme reviews to try to get. And I paid for an advanced review. Anyone can submit their book. There's no guarantee that it will get reviewed, but if you pay for an advanced review, you're guaranteed a review. Then it's up to you to decide how you want to use it. And boy, this review, I ended up using a portion of it as on my back cover. And as I understand it, Midwest Book Review, they send, they do a blast out to libraries. And that was one of the things that the reviewer had said, where my book fits in libraries. And one thing I wanted to just bring up to you that self-published authors can do, I believe, you can get your own Library of Congress number.
Yes.
And you can pay for a cataloging. So you know about that. I did this because, of course, this was another thing I asked my publisher to do. And he was just like, no, but you can. So, okay, I'll spend the $245. But what I love about it is now you go into libraries with your book and they don't have to struggle with where to put it exactly. Yeah. And so that I felt like that was worth that money. I'm also, the fact that my book is going to be in the Library of Congress is so exciting to me given the content. But so I've started now here locally, and I don't know that this is a very efficient way of doing it, but I've kind of walked in and again, having these ARCs from the publisher was huge because, I gifted a few of them, but then I just started, taking them and leaving them places. So I left them, I've been leaving them at libraries, and I've now come to see that the big county library in Minneapolis, they've ordered 3 copies. And I'm following up now. This is, again, where I can use my network and say, hey, request it from this library, request it from this library. And so I'm starting that. And what was so interesting to find out that you're in Omaha, because I've got and when you and Eric were talking about relevance, well,
Mhm.
my dad, they grew up in Sutherland, Nebraska, right?
Yeah.
And so both my grandparents graduated from the University of Nebraska. So
Mhm.
I have that connection. So that's an easy one.
Yeah.
And then I got to do Fort Worth. So I've got, so, and again, it's this list of 20,000 things to do,
I
right?
know.
But hopefully with Eric's program, it'll be a little easier to just,
Yeah.
plug in some of these contacts and send the letter with the relevance to here's my
Mhm.
book and my grandparents and this and that. And of course, I'm going to be in San Diego in 2 weeks, and I've donated one of my books to the branch where I'm giving the presentation. But yes, to answer, that's the long way to get to your question.
No.
My next step is then to reach out again saying, hey, I can do something here. I can do something there. And it's just, and again, trying to decide how much I want to do, given that it's just all so time consuming and that I'm not
Mm.
close to anything. I'm an hour from the Twin Cities. But again, if you can do one or two a month, I think that helps spread the word around, I think.
Very
And it's
much.
just trying to get those folks to be interested and buy in, and hopefully they can do some of the promoting because, like I say, I'm almost exhausted. How
Yeah.
many times are my people going to keep coming to things, right?
Mhm.
I had 80 to 90 people at my book launch. I just don't know that, they're all going to say, oh yeah, we'll go to
Right.
this library reading or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, again, I'm right at that crossroads of deciding next steps and how I crave efficiency. Just,
Mhm.
I hate like spending a lot of time and not getting anywhere. So
Yeah.
I want to spend my time and get results.
What I really enjoy about that comment is that we started this episode, you talking about one of your greatest strengths is curiosity. And I know that you're aware of this, but curiosity is the antithesis of efficiency.
I know. I was just thinking that as I almost could finish your sentence as you were winding that one up. I'm like, I know,
Yeah.
because I'll spend hours at night, and that's where I do my research, where I'm just sitting there with my iPad,
Hmm.
Googling this and that and everything else. And you're right. It is you get that nugget out of there. And I look at the evening hours as it's going to be either doing that or watching
Hmm.
some dumb show on TV. Right. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's, but you're totally right about that.
Yeah, I mean, you and I share the curious bone, and so I'm always wondering, like, what if I were to do this? What if I were to do that? And it's something that I'm constantly having to fight with myself because there are days where it's easier to follow curiosity than it is to necessarily like buckle down and do the writing. Um,
Yes.
so
Yep.
it's
Yep.
funny. I was just on a podcast with Ben Gorman. He was a former guest on my show. He has a small press, not a pipe publishing up in Oregon. And his podcast is Writers Not Writing. So really like a lot of focus around what happens when you have writer's block, or like what are the things you do to procrastinate. And I think for the longest time, I always used to say, I never procrastinate. I'm always working. I'm always writing. I get the same number of hours in every day, yada, yada. I was so proud of my militaristic discipline. And then all of a sudden this last year happened. And it's like, it's such a perfect time to be on the show because I'm slacking on the writing in the worst way. Ugh.
Well, right, and that's the thing I think that we struggle with as writers, because it's much more fun just to write. Although I will say I've embraced the marketing piece as long as I'm feeling like, because it taps into a creative side. Like you said, put your essays into a book. Oh,
Yeah.
I could do that. Sure. Right. That kind of thing where you're being creative about promoting yourself. And once you get
Yeah.
over the hump of, oh God, I got to promote myself. But if you can think of fun things to do, it's a fun thing, but it's kind of staying in balance as far as, and that was one thing that Tim Grahl said, try to do one marketing thing a week. And I thought, oh, well, that's not so
Yeah.
hard, right? I
Right.
mean, and again, it's when you set these goals, and if I send one email out to a library boy, that's nothing, right? And so it's all about how we view the tasks and how we view our time that makes it, the results will vary, right? In how you choose your time. And I do marketing wise, I know we got off on tangents, Jody, but
Yes, we did.
Dan Blanks. I just have to throw out Dan Blanks. If you don't know Dan Blanks, he is phenomenal. And I subscribe to his newsletter. It comes out once a week. He has done webinars with Jane Friedman.
Oh yeah.
And he's got one coming up that is going to be perfect for me where I'm at, where it's how to launch and build your newsletter list on Substack, because
Oh, amazing.
I want to say it was maybe 3 months ago, he moved his, and I don't remember what service he was using before that. And I'd have to just look at the footer to see, but it was seamless because I just got his next newsletter and he was over on Substack.
Yeah.
And what he's wonderful about is he is always pushing connect with your readers, find your readers. And again, I think the key is putting out free stuff for people that's helpful. And then you got them hooked. So then when you offer something else that costs some money, they're like, yep, I'm in. And this latest thing that he did is it's a three-tier offering. So for $49, it's the webinar, and then you get the recording and you can ask questions and whatever. And then I think then it jumps to like $249 where you can get a 30-minute consultation with him. It just, and then the last one is, I don't know, it's like maybe $600, but you get the attention and the personalization of things. And again, for people who have that kind of money, that stuff's invaluable, just to be able to have a face-to-face with somebody who does this for a living in terms of marketing and promoting writers.
Yeah.
And he and I had talked early on because I wanted to hire him, and he's like, well, here's how much I cost. And again, it's that, the 3-month minimum at $3,000 a month. And it's like, oh God, okay, well, that'll be for somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I think the key for those of us that are not independently, from families like your in-laws, we have to hone in on those things that we can get for free, and then take the knowledge that we've gotten for free to put the work in ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think that there's short ways to get places and fast ways to get places, and long, fast, short, slow, all of the nuances in between. I spent so much time listening to podcasts without ever paying for any of the stuff. So Self-Publishing Formula with Mark Dawson, Self-Publishing School with Chandler Bolt, Joanna Penn, she's amazing, and so many different newsletters that I read as well, to get as much free stuff as you can. And what I will say about it is that when you start to run out of juice to squeeze is when you don't have the community. So again, this is going back to the early piece of our conversation, is any program sort of loses some of its value when you don't have access to the really, well, I'm going to be careful about the word success. We talked about that earlier too, but the people who have had success doing these things, if you can't ask them questions directly and get their attention, then you start to not know how to implement things. And so I think that's the hard part, but you can learn it. I mean, everybody started somewhere and everybody did learn it. So determining your timeline probably matters as much as anything else.
Exactly. Yes. 100%.
So Debbie, where can listeners find your book? Where do you want them to buy your book after they're done listening and they're excited to dive in? And how can they connect with your newsletter?
And this is the funny part, right? Do I direct them to Amazon? Do I direct them to their book? So all I would say is my website is www.Debbie, DEBBIE Russell, RUSSELL.com. And what I've tried to do there is, you choose how you want to buy your book, because I've got, it's on Bookshop, it's through Barnes and Noble, it's everywhere. And so I think readers ought to be able to choose, how they want to buy their book and where they want to support with their money. And my blog is there as well. And I am on Substack, Debbie Russell. I think it's Debbie. Isn't this bad? I don't even know what it is. See, that's where I need to just get it all together, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I'm Debbie Stories. I think if you're on Substack and you just put in Debbie Stories, you can find me that way. Perfect. Or Debbie Russell.
Yeah. And I'll make sure I'll link to everything in the show notes too. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. That's lovely. That's lovely.
Excellent. What was there? There was actually one more thing I was realizing that I wanted to touch on, but now it's gone. So I'll have to shoot you an email afterwards if it comes back to me. But it's been phenomenal having you on the show. It's a long time coming. I think I reached out to you a while back, and so I'm glad that we finally did connect. It's been every bit as rewarding of a conversation as I hoped that it would be. And so thank you again for everything that you've personally offered to me in my life, even if you didn't know you were doing it, and for everything you just gave to all the listeners, because they're going to learn a ton from hearing your journey.
Oh, and I have to thank you too, Jody, because you have, this has been one of those just remarkable friendships that I'm grateful to know that you've benefited as much as I have, because I felt like I was on the benefiting side for most of this. And I wanted to wait to get on your podcast till I actually had something to say about marketing. And, I do want to pay it forward as well. So it's like, if people have questions, and, I've got a contact form on my website, and I do want people to learn from the things that I've done and make their decisions the way that works for them, because I think we all have our own individual paths. Yes. And what works for me might not work for someone else. But again, like you say, the way we share our information and support each other, this has been an amazing journey for me that's only just beginning. And so I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful to you and everybody else who's been so nice to me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to TRBM. The theme music was provided by the ever-talented Christopher Talon. And hey, if you liked what you heard, share this show with other readers, because what's the point of telling stories if nobody's listening?